Welcome to the Brian Buffini Show, where we explore the mindsets, motivation, and methodologies of success. Here's your coach, Brian Buffini.
Well, the top of the morning to you, and welcome to the Brian Buffini Show. Very special guest on our show today, one I'm personally very thankful for his service to our country. His name is Rich Diviney, and he was a commanding officer of an elite force in the Navy SEALs, with a career spanning more than 20 years and 13 overseas deployment. As the officer in charge of training for a specialized command, Rich spearheaded the creation of a directorate that fused physical, mental, and emotional disciplines. He also led the selection and human performance development in the SEALs. Rich now teaches on leadership and optimal performance, and recently released his first book, which is a great book, which will not be his last, I tell you that. And it's called The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance, which we'll be getting into today. Rich, thanks for joining us and welcome to the show.
Brian, thanks so much for having me. It's such a pleasure and an honor, so thank you.
And thank you for your very, very deep service to this country and the world in helping us save lives and keep the peace all over the place. So thanks a million.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
So give us a little background. Where'd you grow up? What was like growing up in the Diviney household?
Well, I grew up in New England, and we are, nice town in Connecticut. Kind of an average, just a nice childhood, And, was surrounded, my dad's family was Irish. So that's Diviney is an Irish name, not an Italian name. But my mom is, her dad was from Malta, her mom was from Greek, and she was born in Egypt. And so she used to say, hey, you guys are all mutts, which is good because you're citizens of the world, right? And so we had that open-mindedness from day one. Interestingly enough, my dad was a private pilot, and he used to take us flying every weekend, and we loved it. I have a twin brother. He and I were sold from day one, and so from the age of 6 years old, we wanted to be Navy pilots because we figured, well, Navy pilots, those guys land on ships. It can't be harder than that, right? So, right. And it was really after the first Gulf War in the 90s that I learned about SEAL teams, and said to myself, that sounds really interesting. I love the idea that they were from the water. It was really difficult, and ultimately ended up at ROTC at Purdue and selecting for SEALs and went to BUDS in 96 and spent just under 21 years in the teams, a very kinetic time frame, as we all know, but very grateful to have done it, and got out and, as you mentioned, been working leadership, human performance, and then, of course, kind of wrote this book and collated all the ideas I'd been thinking about for over a decade.
Well, living in San Diego, I have access to a lot of SEALs, and, obviously there's a lot of movies and books and all this mythological stuff around the Navy SEALs. And the thing that I would say that I've observed the most is a lot of pretty down-to-earth, pretty ordinary folks who nothing seems to be a big deal. And I think it's a phenomenal scenario that you guys take on some of the most difficult situations in the world, and nothing's a big deal. And, people have this idea like of BUDS, that it's this hell week. That's all they ever really think about. They think of hell week. Hell week is 1 week in a long, long period of time. And I saw a statistic the other day that said for every 100 Navy SEALs, there's 40,000 applicants. That's kind of a remarkable process. And so, like, people like yourself, like, yeah, I did this and I did that. And I know because of the brotherhood and the code you guys live by, nobody makes it a big deal. But for the ordinary rank and file who, like, having to get up and go, I did 25 minutes on the step mill this morning, and it was a major power play in my brain. At 6:30, I'm sitting there. I got into the gym in the house, and I sat there, and it took me a few minutes of supreme negotiation to get up. For you guys, you do this stuff. Talk a little bit about that for me, if you will. Just that whole mindset, because overcoming challenges, applying yourself to disciplines seems to be kind of a second nature deal. Is that something you're born with? And I know we're going to get into the attributes, but is that something you can develop?
I think a little bit of both. I mean, I think, of course, to get to BUD/S training in the first place, and then, of course, to make it through, you have to have some internal to you. You can't develop it on the spot. And I know we'll get into what that is. To talk about kind of the big deal thing, it's a really fascinating concept, and something that my wife jokes with me and has joked, with me about. In my neighborhood, for example, right across the street, I have a seal. Down the road to my left, I have a seal. Down the road to my right, I have a seal. So there's 4 of us here in this neighborhood. And I remember my wife saying once, she said, I'm so glad these guys are in the neighborhood. And I said, why? She said, because if anything ever happened, I could go to any one of them and they'd act exactly like you act. And I said, what do you mean by that? It's like they'd immediately calm down and start solving the problem. And I think when we talk about not making things a big deal, the kind of this low drama mentality, I think it's a necessity, because when your job is to go into arenas that are a big deal, I mean, combat is inherently a big deal, right? Big deal, the kind of the terminology comes with it this implication of high emotional states, which typically, if we look at the brain, takes you out of your logical thought process and into kind of a limbic kind of emotional response, and you just don't have time for that. You have to be someone who is able to tamp down their emotions and de-dramatize, so you can think logically through situations. So it's a very, very useful and applicable skill as a SEAL. It can be detrimental in normal life, because you're supposed to be making a big deal of something and you're not. But yeah. There's always pros and cons, right?
But the brand, the Hollywoodization of everything is Rambo with the muscled out the wazoo, the headband on and the 15-inch knife, and everything is done by testosterone. And what's struck me, now here's the thing, so I've been through the process, I've been down to Coronado many times. I remember I've watched the classes, I've watched the shows, and you see 250 kids show up, and you think, there's not a chance, not one of these kids is going to quit.
Right.
I mean, they all look like, the stud athletes in great shape, and so that kind of is given. Like, everybody's in shape, everybody's got the physical tools, and then the people that you look from at the outside like the greatest studs of all time, they start disappearing in a matter of days.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you realize this is so much mental, and it's the very opposite. And the phrase you just said, calm down and solve the problem, that, I believe, is more needed for our time than anything you can imagine.
Yeah.
And it's not the brand that Navy SEALs have. It's not the brand that people who are on the front lines have. Because at the end of the day, you guys have that. And it's, like you say, the mental, the emotional, and then there's a physical aspect to it, obviously. What you did was very physical work. Let me ask you this part of it. In regards to your career, as you go through that, what values did you draw upon to drive you through? You mean you had to get through BUD/S, then you were 11 overseas deployment in Afghanistan and Iraq. You saw things that were hard for ordinary people to see.
Yeah.
What mentally, what is the mindset you had personally to push through not only making the teams, but actually being a great team member and a team leader?
Yeah, well, so this gets into attributes. This is what fascinates me really about this whole concept, because I would look around me going through something like BUD/S and say to myself, man, I'm surrounded by superheroes, right? And how did I end up here, right? And that continuously happened throughout my career. I'd be like, oh my gosh, these people are so much better than me. How did I end up here? And what I recognized as these guys became my brothers and friends and stuff, and we talk about it, they thought the same thing. And so what really resonated with me is that the commonality in SEALs, and I think anybody who's a high performer in any endeavor, is a desire to surround oneself with people who they feel are better than them, so that they're constantly reaching, because again, we are a product of our environment, right? And if you surround yourself with these people, if you're kind of bent that way, you begin to step up and do things that you otherwise wouldn't do. So there was certainly the team aspect of it, but I'm also interested in these. What are those elemental things? We don't. When things really get rough and tough and bad and uncertain, it's very hard to apply known skills to that, right? We've all heard it. The true self shows up during times of stress and uncertainty. Well, I was kind of like, okay, what is that true self? And the beauty of something like BUD/S And for me, I loved it. Obviously there was painful going through, but one of the things I loved about Buds was the purity of the process. The process didn't care who you were, where you were from, didn't care if you were the star athlete, didn't care if you were the valedictorian of your school, didn't care if you were from a farm out in Minnesota, right? It basically said, hey, we're going to take you down to sub-zero and see if you have what it takes. And so this is kind of what I call the unconscious genius of Draper Kaufman, who was the original guy who put together the UDT, the underwater demolition teams. And really his first week was Hell Week. And that was, hey, I don't need to have people necessarily who know how to do the job. I can always teach people how to do the job. What I need to know is if you can do the job, because the job is designed to be inherently uncertain, challenging, tough. And so I always joke, in Buds, you spend hundreds of hours running with boats on your head. You spend hundreds of hours PTing with 300-pound telephone poles and running with those on your shoulders. And, obviously hundreds of hours in the cold surf zone. I did hundreds of combat missions during my career. I did thousands of training evolutions, and never on one of those did I carry a boat on my head or a telephone pole on my shoulder, right? So what they were doing to us and what they do at Buds, they weren't training us on how to be Navy SEALs. What they were doing is they were putting us in situations, environments, and conditions to see if we had what it took, to see if we could do the job. And that's where these innate qualities come out. So I think the grit attributes, courage, adaptability, perseverance, resilience, those are all very necessary. We can get into the mental acuity. If I were to pick one that was really important in Buds, at least, it's compartmentalization. Can I proactively choose to not pay attention to that which I cannot control and immediately focus down in on that which I can and not worry about anything else? And to be able to chunk an environment that way of uncertainty is very, very powerful in any situation, but certainly in situations of extreme stress. And then, of course, you get in the team ability attributes. Humility, this idea that, hey, I have something to learn. Integrity, I'm going to do the right thing with my teammates. Humor is a huge one. That's probably the thing I miss most about the SEAL teams is the humor. I mean, I can remember times where I was laughing so hard I was crying, and it was the most miserable situation people can ever imagine, right? Because someone would crack a joke, someone would say something, and we were designed, and kind of humor is a hack. We get these powerful chemicals that allow us to keep going. So I think those are probably the key ones that you see kind of in every guy that eventually makes it through.
Yeah. And let's kind of dive there for a second, because I want to talk about the attributes.
Yeah.
And for you, because there's lots of different words mean things to different people, right?
Yes.
And, you have a very specific meaning for the term attributes. Define that for us? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so attributes are these inherent kind of innate qualities that really define our behavior and inform our behavior, right? So what I need to do is separate it from skills. Skills are not inherent. We're not born with the ability to throw a ball or ride a bike or drive a car. They direct our behavior in known situations. Here's how and when to throw a ball, how and when to ride a bike or shoot a gun in the military sense. And therefore, they're very easily assessed, measured, and tested, right? We can see how well anybody does any one of those things. This is exactly why most businesses and teams during their hiring processes get seduced by skills. They create dream teams based on skills because they're visible. You can see how well someone graphically designs. What skills don't tell us is how people are going to show up in uncertainty, challenge, and stress. When the curveball is thrown, when things go south, when things don't go as planned. This is where we begin to lean on attributes because it's very difficult to apply a known skill to an unknown environment, right? So attributes are more inherent. Every one of us is born with levels of patience, situational awareness, resilience, discipline. Okay, now certainly we developed it over time based on environment, but we're all born with levels of it. And we can see that in small kids. They inform our behavior rather than direct behavior. So in other words, they tell us how we're going to show up. My son's level of perseverance and resilience, for example, informed the way he showed up when he was learning how to ride a bike and falling off a dozen times doing so, right? So they inform our behavior. And then because they're hidden in the background, they're hard to assess, measure, and test. It's hard to see, right? This is where challenge, uncertainty, and stress are when they are the most visible and visceral, which is why the SEAL training laboratory was the perfect laboratory for me to see this. So I was really more about, can I break down, like, okay, people have grit, like, oh, SEALs have grit. Okay, cool, but what is grit? I mean, what does it mean to just do it? And what does it mean to just make it happen, right? I'm really very fascinated with those elemental, how kind of atomic can I get these things so that A, we can understand them in ourselves, but B, especially, it can be ubiquitized, and the everyday human being can say, hey, wait a second, I have that, and that. The good news is that we all have all of the attributes. The difference in each one of us is the levels to which we have each, right? So I might be a level 8 out of 10 on adaptability. Someone else might be a level 2. Now, there's no judgment there, because to judge it would be like judging our own hair color. I mean, it's just how we show up. The difference is, can you look under the hood? Can you start figuring out where you stand? Because we're all different types of automobiles. We're all humans, but we're all different types, right? So someone's a Jeep, someone's a Ferrari, someone's an SUV. The Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do. The Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. The question is, can you figure out your engine, your vehicle, so you can start doing better in your own environment?
So talk to me. I want to break down. I want to go through all 5 and take a minute on each one. Okay. So I'm a practitioner. We're a coaching company, so we're always coaching people up. So I love breaking down into. I mean, I know in many of the interviews you have to give sound bites and so on and so forth, but I'm really a practitioner of this, and I'd like to take our moment to go through grit, the mental acuity, the drive, leadership, and team ability, which are these 5 groups of attributes. And I think it's critical stuff. I think it's even kind of interesting to me the order you put them in. I think there's always science behind that. So talk to me about grit. What does that mean as an attribute, and how do I identify it? As a leader, I'm hiring people all the time.
Yeah.
We have hundreds of staff here, and everyone looks great. A resume and someone comes in for a job, it's eHarmony, right? Everybody sounds great on eHarmony.
That's right.
And then you meet them and you go, what the heck was that? So talk to me about grit. What does grit mean to you?
So grit is a combination of things. Grit is the ability to push through, to nug it out, to kind of just do the hard work of just getting through hard, challenging, bad situations. That's what grit is. And what I realized about grit was as I kind of deconstructed it, it's not just one thing. It was a combination of things that kind of baked and catalyzed make up grit. And so the 4 attributes, so especially when I looked at it from a SEAL lens, which I think can be translated out to any lens really, is our courage, the courage to step into one's fear. And, because again, courage cannot exist without fear. I mean, fear, and that's neurological, by the way. Our ability to step into our fear is kind of been nicknamed the courage switch, and we get a dopamine hit when we decide to do that. So the courage to step into our fear, the perseverance to find our way through, right? This is more of a proactive, and so it's a mix between 3 things. It's a mix between persistence, which is I'm going to kind of do the same thing over and over again because I know this is going to eventually have an outcome. That's the stonecutter approach. Or it can be tenacity. I'm going to do something. If it doesn't work, I'm going to change, right? That would be the mechanics approach. And then fortitude, the mental kind of toughness to engage in both those activities. Perseverance is a balance between all 3 of those things. So can you do that? That's proactive. Adaptability, which now is a little bit more passive, because adaptability speaks to this idea of the environment is changing around me without my control, and I need to adapt. And if I don't, I become a dinosaur. There's the difference between dinosaurs and frogs, right? If you can't adapt, you go extinct, right? So can I adapt? How easy is it for me? And then of course resilience, which is really when I get knocked off baseline, can I bounce back and get back to baseline? How rapidly and efficiently. So that's kind of grit overall. And to have grit means you have a preponderance of each one of those to apply to any tough situation.
Well, it's funny you say this. So again, hiring people, I think, is one of the most important skills to develop, and emotional intelligence. But one of the things that I always ask somebody right off the bat, they come in with their nice resume and this and that and the other, and we'll have a couple of minutes of pleasantries, and then I'll ask this question: What are the toughest experiences you've ever endured in your life? And I believe, I'll be honest with you. Typically for me, I may have an hour-long interview, but that first question typically tells me if we're going any further.
Yeah.
And what I hear is, first of all, sometimes it's really eye-opening, some of the things that people have come through. Sometimes they're embarrassed to tell it because it was such a tough time and this happened and whatever else. It'll also tell you if this person was a victor or a victim coming through it.
Right.
Do they still carry the rocks of that challenge every single day, or did they come through it and say, well, I'd never want it to happen again, but I'm glad it happened to me. It's the making of who I am. And by the way, I mean, if you can read and write, you may have a job after that with me. You know what I mean?
That's right.
Because I think grit is such a crucial deal. And I believe in our world today, what's happened is, we've become the people we are because of the adversity we face in our life.
Mm-hmm.
And the culture has drifted towards, especially with parents. I have 6 kids. And what I see as all my kids have played sports and been in all these things, that so many people want their kids to avoid all adversity.
Right. Yeah.
And yet they know that's what made me. Now I don't want to put my kids into Bud's training at a 10-year-old. Okay, I don't want them to have artificially difficult times. Their life is enough trouble of its own.
Yeah.
But when we try to take away all conflict, when your kids are on a sports team and they're on the bench, that's not the breaking of them, that's the making of them.
Yes.
And it's going through this adversity, and I just think our culture's moving away from this.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is, when a problem shows up at work, when a challenge comes up, when the circumstances change, when the business environments change, when COVID-19 happens, they can't adjust.
Yeah.
They can't adjust and they can't make it. So I think this, and that's why I think this book is, this book has, as a practitioner of personal growth and development, as a coach and an encourager of others, an employer of hundreds, and our company coaches tens of thousands, I think this book has, I read a lot of books. Okay, I'm 2 to 3 a month for the last 20 years. I really think you've hit it out of the park here.
Thank you.
And I think it's difficult even in interview format because you have so much meat on the bone. It's all meat, and I want to try to bring a little sizzle to it.
It's pretty dense, I know. So.
It is, but it's phenomenal stuff. But I'm pulling it out of here because this is a huge one. Talk to me why mental acuity. First of all, what is it, and why is that the second one?
So it's the second one because it and what it is. I mean, it basically talks about how we process the world neurologically, and it's very necessary. It could have been the first one, to be honest with you. Grit and mental acuity could have been the first. Although some would argue that sometimes grit is just turning off your brain and just powering through, right? So it could be either the first or second. But it's how we process the world. So situational awareness, for example, we have 11 million bits of information coming into our systems at any 1 second, okay, through all of our 5 senses. So our brains are already doing a massive amount of deselection. Our forebrains can only process about 2,500 to 3,000 bits, right? So situational awareness is really about one's efficiency and ability to focus on the proper 2,500 or 3,000. It's in a word, those who have high situational awareness could also be said that you have high vigilance, but, this ability to notice. So, and part of this was, I was always quite vigilant. Of course, my background hyper-developed it for me, but I'm the guy who walks down the city streets and I notice people's hands, I notice dark alleyways, I notice cars, I notice things. Some people don't, they walk around through a city street and they're in la la land. Nothing wrong with that, right? But situational awareness speaks to that. Then there's compartmentalization, and this is this idea we just talked about. It's the ability to assess relevance. So out of that 3,500 bits that are coming in, what's relevant to my current objective or outcome? Immediately take those and prioritize them. Okay, out of those things that are relevant, what's the one thing I should focus on first? And then focus, and focus on that. This is probably the most important skill mentally in something like BUDS or really challenging situations, because we oftentimes people get caught up in the enormity of the challenge, right? And there's a saying at BUDS, I know you've heard it, that if you think about Friday of Hell Week on Monday, you will quit.
You're done. Yeah.
You're done, right? You can't think of it. You have to chunk it down. And sometimes those elements are like, hey, I'm just thinking about the next minute. Sometimes it's the next meal, whatever, right? So that's compartmentalization. Task switching is this ability to effectively and efficiently switch between contexts and categories in our lives. We do this all the time. I mean, we're driving a car and we park it, we go into a parking lot, we've just swapped contexts from driving to parking lot, and then we walk into the supermarket, now we're in a different context. So our brains are swapping. We're switching also inside of a category or context, right? When we're driving, we might be going from steering and then suddenly we're braking or suddenly we're turning our blinker, right? The more effectively we can swap, because we can't, multitasking is somewhat a myth. We're more effective. It's more task switching. The more effectively we can hop between those things, the higher up on task switching you are. Some people are really good at it. Some people aren't as good at it, right? In other words, if they get distracted on something, it's hard for them to go back, right? Nothing wrong with that. Just you have to work through it. And then learnability. How effective are we actually processing all of this, absorbing it into our hippocampus, and then learning from it and not making the same mistakes again, okay? So, a perfect example, admittedly, I'm lowest on learnability out of all the mental acuity attributes. What does that mean for me? That means for me that I have to repeat things. I have to do, when I was in certain elements of SEAL training, I would stay after, I'd stay late, I'd repeat things in my head, I'd walk the hallways again just to make sure I had it. Some guys, tell them once and they pick it up. I mean, they got it. They are very high on learnability. So again, there's no judgment on this. You just have to figure out where you stand and then adjust yourself. So that's kind of mental.
And that's where, there's a place where attributes stop and skills can
totally
pick up, right?
Totally.
That's where it's not always the show ponies that win. This next one is we could have a 2-hour conversation about it.
Yeah, we could.
And I've been asked this conversation all over the world. I've presented in 40 countries. And people have often asked me, can you help me have more drive? and I've come to and again, we'll have our discussion here, but I just believe you were born with a certain amount. You were born a certain way, and then it's a matter of optimizing the drive you have.
Yes.
I feel like we've coached hundreds of thousands of people in the last 25 years, and I don't feel like we've ever given anybody an ounce more drive, but what we have, whether it's motivation, encouragement, skills development, accountability, all the things, is we've tried to optimize the drive that they have.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get that out there so you know my perspective
on
what I when I'm reading this, what I'm interpreting. So talk to us about drive. How do you define it?
Yeah.
How can we optimize what we have?
Yeah, so drive, a little bit different from grit. Drive starts to speak to the long-term objectives and goals, the things that are going to take, weeks, months, years, decades to achieve. And they're going to take, kind of a longer time frame. And those attributes are self-efficacy. Okay, first, and that's a mixture between confidence, initiative, and optimism. Those three things.
Say those three again. Those are three big words. Right?
Confidence, I can do this, right? Initiative, I have what it takes to start, because that's huge. And then optimism has to be balanced with realism. So it's kind of optimistic realism, right? In other words, I'm optimistic. I know I don't have all the answers now, but as I move through, I'll figure out all the answers, because there will be challenges, right? So that's self-efficacy. Discipline. Discipline, the way I write about it as an attribute, speaks to long-term goals. Okay, I had to separate this from self-discipline, because self-discipline is different. Self-discipline are those things that we can control that the external world has no say in. Okay, you and I can make a decision. We're going to eat healthier for the next month or two. Okay, and then you and I go to Vegas and we go to the buffet. And that the buffet is not going to make us eat bad food. It's all on us, whether or not we choose. Okay, so that's self-discipline. Discipline, on the other hand, are those long-term goals, those goals that the external world does have a say in. That's, being a Navy SEAL. That's writing a book. That's starting a business as an entrepreneur. That's becoming the famous singer, right? The external world has a say, and the idea of discipline is do you have what it takes to understand the wickets you need to go through, and are you able to continually step through those and not get seduced by the highs and not get crushed by the lows? That's overall discipline.
Yep.
Open-mindedness, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, because the closed mind is not driven, because the closed mind, feels like it has all the answers, right? So there's no drive required. So open-mindedness, uncoachable, right? So open-mindedness is a requirement, and then cunning, which is the last two can be known as kind of pejorative, but cunning I had to add in there because that's a very Navy SEAL trait. People think it's a bunch of, like you said, it's not a bunch of muscle-bound super soldiers, right? One of the key aspects of Navy SEALs are their cunning. They think differently about problems. They think around and through boundaries and rules, whether real or perceived. But they're constantly asking the question: is this rule real or is it perceived? And if it is real, what happens if I bend it, or break it, And so those are the types of questions that allow someone to continue through a process. In overall drive. And then, of course, narcissism. Narcissism was an interesting one, fun one to write. I went back to my own reasons for becoming a Navy SEAL. I had to ask myself, why did I become a Navy SEAL? And I had to really get introspective and be honest with myself. And I said, of course I'm a patriot. Of course I want to serve my country. Of course I want to be in the Navy. Ultimately, I want to be a badass. Okay, I want to try to do something that very few people can do. That's a little bit of narcissism speaking, and every SEAL will agree with that. Again, we're patriots. So narcissism, of course, is a personality disorder, and in too much, too much is obviously a bad thing. But again, every human being wants to be paid attention to and adored and made a big deal of. We get this. When we're paid attention to by our parents, for example, we're getting hit with serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin, three very powerful chemicals that make us really feel good and safe and loved. That happens as adults too. And it's a natural process. And my whole thing was, let's talk about the humanness of all of us. People who set audacious goals, part of it's coming from a little bit of narcissism. Okay, that's perfectly okay. The key is, and what we have to remember is, if you too much narcissism, it's like a vampire looking in a mirror. Okay, you can't see it in yourself. It's impossible. So you need to surround yourself with people who I call grounding wires, the people who give you all the real deal. They pull you back if you're getting a little bit out over your skis. That's my wife. That's my teammate friends, right? And say, hey, Rich, tone it down. You're getting a lot big-headed, right? Something like that. Right. So the key in narcissism is if you've surrounded yourself with sycophants, that's probably bad news, you know.
Especially as a leader.
Especially as a leader. So you have to surround yourself with people who give you the
I like to say that a lot of the SEALs have the right amount of wrong. You know what I mean?
Yes,
and I think
that's
that's
right.
a good thing. And you want to have a little juice, and you want to have a little swagger, and it's okay to get a little acknowledgement. It's okay to be the best at something. It's okay to make more commissions than the next guy. It's okay to be number one in your business or number one in your office. There's good stuff. It's when you find your identity in it, that's when you're screwed. Okay, when you are a SEAL and not a human being. When you are, I've seen people giving up their marriages so they could walk across a stage and get a real estate award.
Yes.
So
I kind of, sometimes I think of it this way, confidence is, I know I can do this. Arrogance and narcissism is, I'm better than you. It's almost one is an internal projection, one is an external projection. And I think we just have to maintain it as an internal one.
Surround ourselves with the right people. Couple more here, very important. Leadership. Now, that's such a general term. Everybody's got there's 40,000 books and 150 speakers a day on leadership. But what's your specific take? Because you were leading people. If you made a mistake, people died.
Yeah.
People died who worked for you, and people died as a consequence of you.
Yeah.
So if you have leadership, when I hear people saying, I hear football players, this is a life and death struggle. No, it's not.
Nope.
No, it's not. That's a ball filled with air on 100 yards where you're getting paid millions of dollars.
Yeah.
I've never had life and death decisions to make as a leader. You have. Mm-hmm. I want your perspective of leadership from the book Attributes.
Well, first of all, the first perspective is that there's a distinct difference between being in charge and being a leader. One is a noun, that being in charge is a noun, and being a leader is a verb. Okay, leadership is a behavior, it's not a position, and we don't get to call ourselves leaders. All right, that's like calling yourself good looking or funny. All right, other people make that decision. They decide whether or not you are someone they want to follow, and they do that based on behaviors. And the attributes I describe, empathy, selflessness, authenticity, decisiveness, and accountability, those are all behaviors of great leaders. Now, we know this. I've been around the world, and I've asked this question when I teach classes on leadership to thousands upon thousands of people. I say, what do great leaders do? And what happens is they throw out words, and I make a list on a whiteboard. And it's usually like 20 or so words, right? Every single list that you make is always the same. It's always pretty much the same words. And these 5 things are always on the list, okay? Because we intuitively know what we believe great leaders do. This is what it is as a behavior. And so in terms of leadership in something like the SEAL teams, it's about behaving in a way that empowers those on your team to make decisions and to do things when it's their turn. And I talk about this concept of kind of dynamic subordination, where you build this environment of trust where when a problem or a challenge hits from any angle, because it can come from any angle at any time, the person who is the closest to the problem and the most competent immediately steps up and takes charge, and then all of us follow, right? So yes, I was the officer in charge for all of my missions. I was the ground force commander, right? Sometimes, though, I was in support of my snipers. Sometimes I was in support of my assaulters. Sometimes I was in support of my breachers. Sometimes they were in support of me as I went through a problem. But it constantly swapped, and you have to have the humility as a leader to understand when it's your turn to step forward. I think one of the hardest things, but one of the most important things about leadership, again, this is why we get confused with the word. Leadership sometimes often means, hey, leading from the front, being in the front. One of the most important jobs of leadership is oftentimes not to be in the front at all, is to push your people up front. Because you set up an environment where I used to tell my JOs, hey, the irony of leadership is if you do your job right, you work yourself out of a job. You create an environment where they don't need you anymore. And that's true leadership.
Yeah, that's great. One of the fabulous dynamics of Bud's training is people like yourself who went to ROTC and you're going in as an officer, you go into Bud's, you're being instructed by someone with a lower rank than you.
Yeah.
Who's giving you the business all day long and is in your face going, do you think you can lead me in battle?
Yeah.
And you're talking about maybe a 20-year vet who's talking to a rookie like you. You have the title, so you have the noun.
Right.
You might be a lieutenant, and this person is not. They might be an E5 or something like that, and they're in your face. They're respectful, but beating the heck out of you, going, "Are you supposed to be able to lead me?
Yeah.
And you can't. You're about to quit. Are you supposed to be?" And I feel like that is a phenomenal leadership training ground, where you have to listen to people.
Yeah.
You have to engage. You have to respect people with experience. And so many people get hired. I mean, we've seen it. I've hired people like this. They came in with the greatest resume in the world, but their idea was leadership looks like this in corporations. You kiss the butt above you, you step on the head below you. They never got information from the grassroots. They never asked their staff. They never got feedback. They never got feedback from the customer.
Yeah.
And if you're in business like I am, your customer is your boss.
Right.
And we have a set of core values here, and one of them is servant leadership. I walk around. We have Buffini and Company, this worldwide brand. I'm the lowest guy in the company. I wash everybody's feet. I will never ask people to do what I will not do. And we'll have people who come in and they go, no, I want the big office with the view, as opposed to no. You have to be willing to do whatever. But the it's not just doing, it's the attitude of, hey, I want to empower you, I want to bring you along, and I eventually want to make you not need me.
Yes.
And
yes.
I think it's phenomenal. I think that is, that attribute there, because it's under combat conditions,
Yes.
is the most exposed leadership techniques of all. And I think there's tremendous value in what you have to share. We could go all day, but we only have time for one more. Talk about a phrase that civilians like myself wouldn't understand too much, but the word team means something very different to you guys. What does team ability mean?
Yeah, team ability. I think I first heard it from the Spec War folks, from the SEAL folks. I don't know where else. I don't think it's a word, but it's this ability to operate and effectively be on and be a productive contributing member to a team. And again, just like leadership, you don't get to call yourself a great teammate. Your other teammates designate you that, and it's based on these behaviors. And these behaviors, again, are very elemental. Integrity, do the right thing, and now do the right thing has to be very carefully considered, because every team, every culture might have different definitions for what do the right thing is. And so especially in SEAL teams or any teams that have a very tribal culture, you have to make sure that do the right thing is defined in congruency with what the military defines do the right thing is, and our nation defines what do the right thing is. All right, but that's the leader's job. The leader's job is to create a culture where do the right thing is explicit, and everybody knows what that is. So that's do the right thing. Integrity, conscientiousness, that's really the ability to work hard, be reliable, and be diligent. Are you showing up? Are you working hard? Are you reliable and consistent? Are you someone who's consistently asking, hey, what else is there to do? When I'm done with my stuff, hey, who else can I help? That's a common trait in the SEAL teams, which I always loved. It's always like, hey, once you're done, go see if anybody else needs help. And that endears you to your teammates. Humility, of course, again, fairly self-explanatory. You can't learn anything. Nothing. Arrogance never shows well on a team. It just doesn't. So it's almost too intuitive to dive into deeply, but that's what it is. And again, that's decided by others. You can't, as soon as there's a saying, I can't remember who I quoted, but it's like humility is a difficult thing, because as soon as you think you have it, you've lost it, right?
Right.
Because other people will decide that, and you just have to look at other people and say, hey, I'm surrounded by people I can learn from. And then humor, which is again my favorite, because humor, you laugh, you're involuntarily flooded with three chemicals: dopamine, endorphins, and oxytocin. Dopamine tells us, hey, this is great, keep going. Endorphins masks our pain, and oxytocin binds us to other human beings. And so laughter is a binding element that hacks into courage and allows us to keep going, and it's just phenomenal. I've never met a high-performing team that doesn't have at least one class clown who can make jokes when things are tough.
Well, and in the world we live in today, that's becoming repeatedly humorless.
Right.
It is worth the effort.
Yes.
It's worth the effort. And yes, you have to be more politically correct, and yes, you have to think through consequences, and you can't, go to the lowest form of humor. But I feel like it's ever more needed. I'm an Irishman, so if we're not having a laugh, there's no point in showing up.
Right.
And, without it, I just think it's so much missing. You talk about all the chemicals that are released
Yeah.
It is the best medicine, and it's often needed. I will say this: we're going to segue to our 5 questions here, Rich. The book it's very readable, but it's like your interview here. It's very dense. There's so much in there. I have 5 pages of notes. But the value here, and the value I encourage you in as you're out there, because I've brought in how many thousands of speakers I've hired over the years, is so many people today, they were on The Apprentice on Tuesday and their book comes out on Thursday. There's lots of theories. There's lots of people now. We as a culture, we don't ask people what they did. I'm in the industry of real estate training. Most of the trainers in my industry never sold a house.
Wow.
But they have technology, they have techniques, they have this, they have. The fact that something's done under fire is where, everything gets purified under fire. That's how gold gets purified, in the furnace, in the crucible it's called. And that's why people are so fascinated with groups like the Navy SEALs. And as you guys talk about it, and you talked about team ability here, I've never heard a long-term Navy SEAL guy ever refer to himself as a SEAL. I only ever hear themselves referred to as a team guy.
Mm-hmm.
And when they want to compliment somebody, he's a good team guy.
Right.
And that's all I ever hear. And, what you've learned and your disciplines, and you've been a very thoughtful guy. You've brought the science behind it and the emotion behind it and the chemical implications for the body behind it. I just feel like this is done under the crucible of true, you make a leadership mistake, it costs people's lives.
Right.
Yeah, you make it. You hire the wrong guy, it costs people's lives. The 5 attributes we're talking about here in this book: grit and mental acuity and drive and leadership and team ability, were under this crucible, and that's why I think there's such extraordinary value in the work. So I love the book. I will say I'm on my 2nd time through, and I'm seeing a hell of a lot more than I did the first time through, and I'm probably going to have to read it a few times more. But it's fabulous, and it's a credit to you, and I wish you the best of success with it.
Thank you.
I have 5 rapid-fire questions. You're a guy who's used to rapid-fire.
Yep.
We've asked every celebrity in the world these questions, so I'm going to give it to you, and it's just you didn't know they're coming. They're straight from the cuff, so here we go. What's the single best piece of advice, Rich, you've ever received?
Single best piece of advice, I would say, be resolute in the outcome, but don't dictate the pathway. Because you have to be adaptable. The pathway is going to change. If you're climbing a rock, mountain climbers can teach us this. Yes, you want to get to the top, but as you go up that rock, you're going to see different knot holes. You're going to see different pathways. Sometimes you're going to have to go down to go to the next best knot hole.
Like a
mountain climber. So the pathway has to be flexible and moldable. Be resolute in the outcome. Don't dictate the pathway.
Who was if you were getting advice from somebody, who was your biggest influence? Where'd your best advice come from?
Oh gosh, so I don't know if there was one person. So I always tried to read as much as I could and talk to as many people as I could. I mean, my dad always gave me great advice. I had some great commanding officers. I love books and I love hearing. But listen, we can also learn from the bad leaders too. I call it reverse mentorship. And that's you work for a leader. You're in a culture that doesn't work, and you say, "Okay, I am learning. I am never going to do that."
I know what not to do. No,
That's right.
That's like some are cautionary tales.
That's right.
All right. What's the one talent or gift you wish you possessed that you currently don't?
More self-discipline. I have to constantly work on my self-discipline.
Interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that one. In fact, that would be the one thing I wouldn't have guessed. So God help the rest of us. Okay. What book has been most instrumental in your life?
A book my mom gave me when I was in high school called The Key to Yourself by Venice Bloodworth. It was a book that talked about the law of attraction. And again, I started getting into, and I'm not here to promote or even talk about the efficacy of metaphysics, but it talked about this idea of writing down goals, being resolute, moving towards them, being positive in your thinking, and that changed my life. I really started getting to the brain and the power of the subconscious, and I just started looking at all of that, and it shaped me quite a bit.
Wow. Well, there must be quite a story behind your mom that she gives her teenage kid that book. So she must be something special herself.
She is.
Okay. I know you're not a huge a TV watcher and so on and so forth, but if you're scrolling through the channels and there's one movie and every time it's on you stop and take a look at it, what's the one movie you've watched over and over again?
Oh my gosh, there's several. Geez, I would say I love Shawshank Redemption. Every time I see that, I just love that one. The music, the drama. I love Back to the Future. That's a brilliant movie. And I love the movie Interstellar. I love this idea of exploration. So I'll give you 3.
Nice. That's great. That's what I find with that movie is when I ask the movies, I really get a picture of the person we're talking to, and so does our audience. And Shawshank is my number 1, and it's been quite a few people, so pretty spectacular. Last but not least, something that's on the bucket list that you haven't checked the list on just yet.
I want to learn how to kite surf.
Kite surf.
Yeah, that looks
nice.
It looks like it's a lot of fun. I just have to start doing it.
If you go about 4 minutes from where I am right now is one of the capital of the world, Carlsbad, California.
I know.
And they are kite surfing as we speak. And every one of those people looks like they have a giant grin on their face, and they're moving at about 30 knots.
I know. It seems
good
phenomenal.
Stuff. That's great. Well, listen, first of all, thank you for your service to the country, to what you've done in your life. Thank you for what you're doing now. I think this is every bit as big a service as what you have been doing. It's phenomenal stuff. I really thoroughly enjoyed the book. It's a big boy, big girl book, and you got to put your big boy, big girl pants on. But you know what? I think in times when everything is so milquetoasty, this is really some big meat, some great stuff. We've covered a lot of meat on this podcast today. I think people are going to have to listen to it many times over. So thanks for being a guest on the show today. It's been a lot of fun having you.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for what you do as well. And you spread good news, good message, good everything, and that's what we need as well. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. Well, when we leave here today, I'm going to leave you with the Navy SEAL of mothers, Therese Buffini, 90 years of age. You talk about grit and mental acuity, drive, leadership, and she built the team ability of 6 raucous Buffinis that have gone on to do all kinds of great stuff. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Mom. Thanks, Rich, again. Thanks to all of you for listening. And here's a little Irish blessing to brighten your day.
May the road rise up to meet you, and may the wind always be at your back. May the rain fall soft upon your fields, and the sun shine warm upon your face. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the hollow of his hand. See you next time.